So one of my favorite things to do is to do one of your recipes, and a good friend of the channel submitted one of their recipes, so let's go and do it. Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm excited because we are doing something that I love to do, and that is to do a submission done by one of the subscribers. The submission or the request was to do a banana rum, and the subscriber also sent me a recipe for a banana rum. So yeah, the recipe we will be doing today is called Pirate's Life Banana Rum. Now the recipe is in freedom units. I will be posting it down in the description, but I will be converting it for the purposes of this video into metric. I will put up on the screen as well as I go through with all the different units and measures. But this is a 5-gallon batch, and we are going to be doing a 20-litre wash or a 5-gallon batch, but with a buttload of bananas. The recipe calls for super ripe or very ripe bananas. Now that means one or two things. Number one, the bananas have converted as much of the starches in it into sugars themselves, because the bananas have amylase in them. So we don't have to add any amylase into the recipe to get those starches to convert into sugar. And number two, it's going to be very sweet, and it's going to give a fantastic funky banana flavor to the final rum. So yeah, I'm very excited for this one. So yesterday what I did is I took all the bananas and I just gave them a quick squish. Just a light pressure all the way around. What you're going to do is you're going to bruise the bananas. And by bruising the banana, you activate or you supercharge the amylase inside of the bananas to start turning the banana into a mushy mess on the inside. The amylase converts the starch into sugars, and yeah, you can get even more sugar out of the banana as well as more flavor. So I just want to point out with a nice close-up, as you can see there's a normal banana that hasn't converted most of the starches into sugars, and over there, straight out of the peel, you can see it all mushy, while the amylase converted the starches into sugar. So that's what we want. We want all of the banana to almost be a mushy mess. Then after mushing all of them inside of the peels, what I did is I took a nice dark bag, closed it up. So then I left it overnight in this bag, allowing the bananas to off-gas. Now the bananas release a natural gas, the name escapes me now, but it releases a natural gas that makes it ripe really quickly. They are now ready to be mashed, and the recipe actually says hand mashing, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to peel all of these bad boys, get them into a bowl, into a trusty dog bowl, and then yeah, after mashing it up, we need to start then with the next part of the recipe. So we're going to use a hand masher to get it all squished up while we prepare for the next step. So while the bananas are in the bowl, all mashed up, that amylase will continue working, turning the banana nice and brown and extracting even more sugar and more flavor. All I'm going to do is I'm going to cover the bananas with another dog bowl, set it aside so there's no buggies or flies or stuff that can get into it. Set it aside and start with step number 2. Now according to the recipe, step number 2 is to use a big ass pot, get it to a boil to dissolve the sugars. Now for the next step, with 2.3 kilograms of sugar or 5 pounds of sugar in the pot with about 3 liters of water, what I need to do now is add the molasses. Now the molasses is 1.5 liters of molasses or 1.5 quarts of molasses. So what I'm going to do now is, it's not part of the recipe, but I always do it for all my rum recipes, is I invert my sugars. Now if you want to learn more about inverting sugars, Bearded and Board has a great video explaining it. I'll link it up here. Basically, inverting your sugar means boiling it for a while with an acid, so roughly about 20 minutes with any form of an acid, whether it's lemon juice or citric acid, just to get that bond between the sucrose or the fructose and the glucose to break apart. So what we're going to do now is we're going to add a little bit of citric acid just so we can get all the starches, all the sucrose inverted. So I'm going to add roughly about a teaspoon of citric acid. So just keep stirring and checking up until all the sugar has been dissolved. We're going to bring it up to a boil, put the lid on and leave it for 20 minutes. While we wait for this to come up to a boil, why don't you hit that subscribe button down in the corner there if you want to know what's happening with those two little jars at the back bubbling away, or those two buckets. Now that is something very interesting to do with the Millipop moonshine. If you haven't seen that video yet, there's a link up here where we are trying to make a Millipop moonshine. Generation 1 came out awesome. Generation 2 is in the buckets over there, and we are trying 2 different variants. So if you want to see what's happening there, remember, hit that subscribe button down in the corner there. 20 minutes have elapsed and this baby has been boiling quite nicely for the last 20 minutes. Time now to turn off the heat, get this down to about 50 degrees centigrade, or as the recipe calls for, around about 115 degrees Fahrenheit. So that should be about 48 degrees centigrade. So once we get it to that temperature there, what we're going to do is we're going to add our bananas in, get it back up to 50 degrees, and then let it cool down naturally up until we can pitch it. So how am I going to cool it down? What I did is I have a basin full of cold water. I'm going to take the pot, put it in the cold water, stirring it around, getting the temperature down to 50 C. With the temperature now below 50 C, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the banana into the pot. Then I'm going to bring it up to the recommended temperature between 115 and 120 degree Fahrenheit. Now if we convert that back, it's between 48 to about 49 degrees C. The wash or the molasses sugar mixture now is currently sitting at about 40 degrees centigrade. So what I'm going to do now is quickly add in the bananas. With the bananas in and the temperature sitting at about 35 degrees centigrade, what I'm going to do now is turn the heat back on and get it to 50. With us approaching 120 Fahrenheit and 50 degrees centigrade, what I'm going to do now is kill the heat, keep stirring it for a couple of minutes so we can get all those starches nice and loose, and then leave it to cool down naturally. According to the recipe, what we need to do now is once it's cold enough to stick our finger in the bucket, we need to transfer it to our fermenter. Now if you've ever worked with bananas and you've stuck around this far to get a tip, the tip is leave a ton of headroom. Now the recipe also warns you to leave a ton of headroom, but what I normally do is when I work with bananas is I make enough for one fermenter, I divide it up afterwards into 2 fermenters and then let it ferment out. Once it's done fermenting, what I do then is I filter and transfer it back into one fermenter, allow it to finish fermenting completely after removing all the solids. Then run it through my still. So I'm going to mix everything in one bucket before I transfer it into 2 separate fermenters. Make sure your spigot or your tap is closed. Don't want another mess on the floor. So tap closed, get this in there. To make sure we get all the lovely goodness out of this pot, I'm going to add my cold water into this pot, stir it around to get everything off the sides as much as I can, and then dunk it into the fermenter. Just going to give this one quick last stir to get everything incorporated. Test the temperature to make sure we can pitch our yeast. Now the yeast we'll be using today will be Bootlegger's brandy yeast again. Now the reason why I use that yeast is it loves to chew through sugar, number one, and as well it ferments out really quickly. So the recipe calls for a turbo yeast. Now I don't have a turbo yeast, so what I'll be using is the Bootlegger's brandy yeast. With everything nice and mixed up to make sure the yeast is incorporated all through the wash, what I'm going to do now is just do a quick gravity reading The recipe does not say what gravity we're supposed to hit, but just for my sanity, just to check what gravity we are at, I'm expecting about a 1090 to a 1.1. Actually much lower than that. We are sitting on a 1.070, giving us a potential alcohol of about 11%. Time to transfer half the wash into this fermenter and the other half into the other fermenter. So let's get transferring. So with the wash, the rum, whatever you want to call it, in the fermenters now, and if you're looking at this and thinking that's a ton of headroom, yes it is, but if you've ever worked with bananas, you'll know why. If this is your first time going to be working with bananas, leave a lot of headroom. This stuff is going to expand, and as soon as the yeast kicks in, it's going to create a big foam head. And what we're going to do is we're going to stir this every couple of days, or depending on how high the head gets, probably every day, up until it is done fermenting. Then we're going to filter it, transfer it back into a bucket and let it ferment out completely dry. And yeah, looking forward to running this bad boy. If you stuck around to this far, thank you very much and have a lekker day.